He built an empire with his own hands, only to discover his wife and son-in-law were quietly plotting to steal it all. But when betrayal becomes strategy, revenge is built brick by brick. I was driving past my son-in-law's house and decided to check on him, but when I saw my wife's car at the gate, a shiny silver Lexus that should have been in our garage, my heart clenched with a premonition of trouble. Something's wrong, I thought, and I quietly approached the window, trying not to give myself away. What I heard inside destroyed and changed my world forever. When the old fool finally signs the papers, we'll have everything we planned for. Margaret's voice drifted through the half-open window like poison in my veins. I sat frozen in my car outside Brianna's house, keys still dangling from the ignition. 5 minutes ago, I called my daughter to surprise her with dinner plans. Sorry, Dad, I'm not home. But Dan's there working on some case files, she'd said cheerfully. Yet here was Margaret's silver Lexus parked brazenly in the driveway. I killed the engine and approached the window on trembling legs. Through the gap in the curtains, I could see them. My wife of 25 years lounging on my daughter's couch like she owned the place, and Dan leaning against the bookshelf. With that smug expression I grown to despise. The timeline's perfect, Dan was saying, his lawyer voice crisp with satisfaction. File in June. Claim irreconcilable differences with the new Iowa statutes. Margaret is entitled to half of everything acquired during marriage, plus spousal support for life. Margaret laughed, that tinkling sound I'd once found charming. The construction business alone is worth $12 million. Add the rental properties, the vacation home, and investments. We're looking at nearly $20 million total. My hand shook as I fumbled for my phone, hitting record just as Dan continued his legal dissertation. The beautiful part is his trusting nature. Alan has no idea we've been documenting his assets for months. Bank statements, property deeds, business valuations, everything's already copied. He gestured toward a manila folder on the coffee table. He practically handed us the keys to his kingdom. 2 years of playing the devoted wife, Margaret said, examining her manicured nails, pretending to care about his boring construction stories, nodding sympathetically when he worried about payroll. God, the man believes I love him. A twig snapped. Under my foot, both of them froze mid-conversation. Heads turning toward the window like startled deer, I pressed myself against the brick wall, heart hammering against my ribs, sweat beating despite the April chill. Did you hear something? Margaret's voice carried a note of suspicion. Probably just the neighbor's cat, Dan replied after a pause. You're paranoid. Can you blame me? If Alan discovered this before we're ready, he won't. The man couldn't spot a conspiracy if it were a neon sign. Dan's laughter held nothing but contempt. By September, you'll be divorced, wealthy, and free to do whatever you want with whoever you want. I forced myself to stay hidden until the conversation resumed, my phone capturing every venomous word. When I finally crept back to my car 15 minutes later, my entire world had shifted on its axis. 25 years of marriage reduced to a legal strategy session between my wife and son-in-law. The folder on that coffee table haunted me. Months of planning, documentation, and preparation. While I'd been working 16-hour days to build our future, they'd been systematically mapping its destruction. I sat in the driver's seat, staring at my hands wrapped around the steering wheel. The same hands that had built a construction empire from nothing, that had provided every comfort Margaret enjoyed, that had walked her down the aisle when her father refused to attend our wedding. Margaret's voice echoed in my memory. The man believes I love him. The worst part was that until 30 minutes ago, I did. The front door opened just as I reached for my car keys. Margaret emerged first, her designer handbag swinging casually at her side, followed by Dan adjusting his tie with practiced precision. Neither expected to find me sitting in my Honda, and the shock registered on Margaret's face like a slap. Alan, her voice climbed an octave. What are you doing here? I forced my expression into something resembling normalcy, though my pulse thundered in my ears. 25 years of marriage had taught me to read her moods, but apparently she'd been acting the entire time, just finished. A job site inspection nearby. I lied smoothly as I climbed out of the car. Thought I'd stop by and see Brianna. Dan stepped protectively closer to Margaret, his lawyer instincts kicking in. Those pale gray eyes studied my face with uncomfortable intensity, searching for cracks in my story. "She's not here," Margaret said quickly. "I was just helping Dan organize some legal documents for a client." The lie rolled off her tongue with practiced ease. How many lies had I swallowed over the years without question? Oh, I kept my voice light, conversational. "I thought you'd be at work until 6 today. Didn't you mention something about the Henderson proposal this morning?" A flicker of panic crossed her features. "I left early. Headache." "Sorry to hear that." I turned to Dan with manufactured friendliness. "Working on an interesting case. Asset division." He replied without thinking, then caught himself. "For a divorced client. Very complex financial situation. The irony would have been amusing if it weren't destroying my life." Margaret's eyes darted between Dan and me, calculating. "How long have you been here, Alan?" "Just pulled up." "Why?" "No reason," but her smile looked painted on. "You seem tense. Everything okay?" The woman who plotted my financial ruin for months was asking about my well-being. I almost laughed. "Long day, you know how it is." I gestured toward Dan. "Don't let me interrupt your work session. We were just finishing up," Dan said, his hand settling possessively on Margaret's lower back. The gesture seemed automatic, intimate. How long had that been happening? Good timing then. I pulled out my phone to check the time, making sure they could see the device. Neither reacted, but I caught Dan's eyes lingering on the screen. "I should head home anyway. Dinner won't cook itself." Margaret's laugh sounded forced. "I'll be along shortly. Just need to wrap up a few things here." "Take your time." I opened my car door, then paused as if remembering something. "Oh, Margaret, Dr. Patterson's office called about rescheduling your physical. Something about a conflict with your work schedule." Her face went blank for a split second, the look of someone whose lie had been exposed. Then she recovered with impressive speed. "Must be a mix-up. I'll call them later. No worries. These things happen." I slid into the driver's seat, heart hammering. "See you both later." As I backed out of the driveway, I watched them in my rearview mirror. They stood frozen until my car disappeared around the corner, then immediately moved closer. Together, heads bent in urgent conversation. The three-way dance of deception was complete. They suspected I might have overheard something. I knew they were planning to destroy me, and all of us were pretending everything was perfectly normal. Margaret would drive home separately, armed with explanations for her early departure from work and her presence at Dan's house. She probably arrived at a dozen reasonable justifications by the time she walked through our front door, but she didn't know about the recording on my phone. 43 minutes of crystal clear audio that would change everything. I pulled into traffic, hands steady on the wheel for the first time in an hour. The shock was wearing off, replaced by something colder and more focused. They thought they were playing chess with a checkers player. They were about to discover their mistake. Asterisk the mind that had built cold construction from a single truck into a $12 million enterprise was already strategizing. The phone rang, jarring me from my reverie. Brianna's name flashed on the screen. "Hey, sweetheart." I kept my voice warm, normal. "How's your day going?" "Dad, I need to ask you something." Her tone carried the careful neutrality she used with troubled patience. "Is everything okay between you and Mom lately? There's been this weird tension whenever I'm around both of you." My hand tightened on the phone. How much did she know? How much had Dan told her about their conspiracy? "What makes you ask?" "Little things. Mom seems stressed about money, asterisk, which is strange since business has been so good. And Dan keeps asking weird questions about your company structure, like how the partnerships work and who controls what assets." She paused. "It feels like they're fishing for information, but I can't figure out why." Fishing for information. My daughter's psychology training had detected the predatory behavior her mother and husband thought they'd hidden. Probably just curiosity about how the business world works. I said carefully, Your mom's always been interested in financial security, maybe, but Brianna didn't sound convinced. Dad, if something was wrong, I mean really wrong, you tell me, right? The question hung between us like a loaded weapon. Tell her what? That her mother was planning to destroy me financially? That her husband was orchestrating the whole conspiracy? That the family she trusted her entire life was built on lies? Of course, sweetheart. But everything's fine. Just the usual business pressures. After we hung up, I sat staring at my research notes. Dan had been pumping my daughter for information about my business structure. The scope of their intelligence gathering operation was broader than I'd realized. Time to make sure they got exactly the information I wanted them to have. I was still processing Brianna's warning when my secure phone line rang. Sarah Chan, my accountant for 12 years, her voice crisp with professional efficiency. Alan, I've got the asset protection documents ready for signature. When you mentioned wanting to update estate planning, I took the liberty of researching optimal structures. A pause. This is about more than estate planning, isn't it? How perceptive of you. 28 years in forensic accounting teaches you to read between the lines. Should I ask what kind of threat we're protecting against? The domestic variety? Sarah's silence spoke volumes. She'd handled 3 divorces from my construction crew supervisors. She knew the landscape. I'll have everything ready by noon, she said. The business assets will be completely insulated from any personal legal action. Whoever is planning to take a run at your personal finances won't even see the real money be 10 o'clock a.m. I was sitting across from Tom Bradley, president of First National Bank and my golf partner for 15 years. The mahogany conference room smelled of coffee and leather, familiar territory where I'd negotiated dozens of construction loans. Account security review, I said, sliding documents across the polished table. I need all joint access points verified and temporarily frozen pending identity confirmation. Tom's eyebrows rose slightly. This is comprehensive, Alan. Every joint account, credit line, and automatic payment system. Every single one. May I ask? You may not, but I smiled when I said it. How long for the security holds to take effect? Immediately upon your signature. All account holders will receive notification that access requires in-person verification. With photo ID and secondary documentation, Tom studied my face. This is going to inconvenience Margaret significantly. I'm counting on it. The security holds were activated at 11:47 a.m., just as Margaret was sitting down for her weekly lunch at Riverside Country Club with 3 other construction wives. My phone buzzed with the first declined transaction at 12:03 p.m. I was reviewing contractor bids when Margaret's panic call came at 12:50. Alan, something's wrong with our accounts. My card was declined at lunch, and when I called the bank, they said there's a security hold. Do you know anything about this? Perfect innocence? No mention of the joint account with Dan's name. No acknowledgement of the missing $47,000. No admission that she'd been moving money without my knowledge. Security hold. That sounds serious. Did they say what triggered it? Something about verifying identity and account access. It's embarrassing, Alan. I'm sitting here with Linda and Susan and Jonna, and I can't even pay for my lunch. The distress in her voice was genuine, not because her conspiracy was threatened, but because her social status had been publicly compromised. After 25 years of marriage, I knew Margaret's priorities. I'll call Tom Bradley immediately, I assured her. We'll get this sorted out. But I didn't call Tom. Instead, I drove to the construction site where my crew was pouring the foundation for the new medical center. The familiar sounds of machinery and worker voices felt grounding after 3 days of financial warfare. My phone buzzed with text messages throughout the eternal Margaret. 1:47 p.m. Still can't access any accounts. This is ridiculous. Margaret to 23 p.m. Tom Bradley's secretary says he's in meetings all day. What kind of bank president is too busy for his best customers? Margaret 3:15 p.m. Even our emergency credit line is frozen. How am I supposed to buy groceries? Each message brought a grim satisfaction. For 25 years, Margaret had taken financial security for granted, while I worked 60-hour weeks to provide it. Now, she was experiencing what it felt like when that security vanished without warning. Dan's reaction proved even more interesting. At 4:30 p.m., my private investigator, Mike Rodriguez, called with an update. Thompson tried to access his shared account with your wife 3 times this afternoon. When that failed, he attempted to withdraw funds from what appears to be a trust account, probably your daughter's education fund that he manages. That one's frozen, too. Per your instructions, his demeanor, angry phone calls to bank representatives, threats of legal action, demands to speak with management. Classic overconfident. Attorney discovering his leverage has evaporated by 6 p.m. I was home reviewing the day's financial battlefield from my office. Every shared account frozen, every joint credit line suspended, every automatic payment system requiring my authorization. Margaret's access to 25 years of accumulated wealth had been reduced to whatever cash she carried in her purse. The security measures were completely legal. A husband protecting marital assets pending estate planning review. Tom Bradley would confirm that standard banking protocols had been followed precisely. But Margaret and Dan would understand the message perfectly. The man they planned to financially ambush was no longer playing defense. My phone rang at 6:47 p.m. Margaret's number, but the voice that answered would be desperate now, not manipulative. Time to see how quickly conspirators turned on each other. When their plans started crumbling, drive to Cole Construction's headquarters felt like traveling toward a reckoning she'd been avoiding her entire adult life. My office building stood solid against the April sky, brick and steel and honest workmanship. Everything Dan's glass tower pretended to be but wasn't. Sarah, my secretary for 8 years, greeted Brianna with the warmth reserved for family members who showed up to job sites and company picnics. He's expecting you, honey. Go right in. I stood when she entered, reading her body language with the careful attention I'd learned from watching Margaret's moods for 25 years. But Brianna carried herself differently. Professional posture, clinical distance, the bearing of someone who made difficult decisions. Dad, we need to discuss what's happening between you and Mom. Her voice held the careful neutrality she used with troubled patience. I've spent 2 days analyzing the situation, and I need to understand your perspective. What's your mother tell you that you're exhibiting controlling behaviors, financial manipulation, and possible emotional abuse? She sat across from my desk, hands folded. Precisely. She wants me to support her victim narrative using my professional credentials. The clinical language was jarring, coming from my daughter, but I recognized her strategy distanced herself emotionally to evaluate facts objectively. And what do you think? I think Mom tried to manipulate me the same way she's been manipulating you. Brianna's green eyes, so much like Margaret's, but clearer somehow, studied my face. Show me the evidence. Dad, I need to hear what you heard. I hesitated. Once I played that recording, there would be no protecting her from the truth about her mother and husband. But Brianna was 30 years old, a licensed psychologist, capable of handling reality. I pressed play on my phone. Margaret's voice filled the office when the old fool finally signs the papers. We'll have everything we planned for. Brianna's expression didn't change for the first minute. Professional detachment held as she listened to her mother mock 25 years of marriage. Heard Dan calculate legal strategies for maximum financial damage. Absorbed their cold discussion of timeline and asset division. But when Margaret said 25 years of playing the devoted wife, Brianna's composure cracked slightly. Her hands clenched once, then relaxed as the recording ended. Silence stretched between us like a bridge neither wanted to cross. First, how long have you known? She asked finally. 6 days. I overheard this conversation at your house last Tuesday. And you've been what? Building a defense strategy while pretending everything was normal. Something like that. She leaned back in her chair, processing. Mom asked me to evaluate your mental state. She wanted me to provide a professional opinion that you were exhibiting abusive patterns. What did you tell her? That I couldn't ethically assess someone without proper evaluation. That her claims seemed inconsistent with your established behavioral patterns. Brianna's voice carried a note of anger now. She tried to use my training as a weapon. Dad, against you and against professional standards. The weight of betrayal, not just mine, but hers, settled between us. I'm sorry you've been dragged into this, sweetheart. I'm not. Her tone sharpened with resolve. I'm glad I know the truth. The question is, what happens now? I studied my daughter's face, seeing the strength I'd helped build, but the independence I couldn't control. That's your choice, Brianna. I won't ask you to choose sides. I already have. She stood up. Decision made. I choose truth over family loyalty. I choose evidence over emotion. And I choose to support the parent who didn't try to manipulate my professional ethics. Relief flooded through me, followed immediately by concern. What about Dan? What about him? Her voice went cold. My husband participated in a conspiracy to financially destroy my father. While using my psychology practice as cover, that marriage is over. Brianna, Dad, I'm not making this decision in anger. I'm making it based on character assessment and behavioral evidence. She moved toward the door, then paused. I'll testify honestly about family dynamics if needed, but I won't be anyone's weapon, including yours. I understand. Good, because there's one more thing I need to do. She left my office with the determined stride of someone who found moral clarity in a situation designed to destroy it. 20 minutes later, she'd be walking into her own home to confront the man who betrayed not just me, but the professional ethics she'd spent years building. I sat alone in my office, surrounded by the evidence of 35 years of honest work. It felt something I hadn't experienced since this nightmare began. Hope that truth might matter. Brianna's key turned in the lock at 7:30 p.m., and Dan's startled expression revealed he hadn't expected her home early. He sprawled on our living room couch, legal documents scattered across the coffee table. A half-empty whiskey bottle within reach. We need to talk, I announced, setting my purse down with deliberate precision. Rough day. He didn't look up from whatever case file he was pretending to review. The Barrett deposition got postponed again. I know about the conspiracy, Dan. His head snapped up. The careful lawyer's mask slipped, revealing something desperate underneath. What conspiracy? The one where you and my mother planned to financially destroy my father, while using my psychology credentials to support false abuse allegations. I remained standing, maintaining the advantage. I heard the recording, every word. He set down his whiskey glass with exaggerated calm. Brianna, I think you're misunderstanding. 25 years of playing the devoted wife. Sound familiar? The color drained from his face. Dan Thompson, who could argue cases before the state Supreme Court, suddenly looked like a man watching his world collapse. How much did you hear? Everything. Asset division strategy, timeline, your fee calculation, mom's performance reviews. I sat across from him, maintaining professional distance. Was our entire marriage part of this plan? 3 days later, Margaret discovered that social destruction moved faster than legal proceedings. The Riverside Country Club's dining room buzzed with Saturday brunch conversation, but clusters of women fell silent as she approached their tables. Linda Patterson, her bridge partner for 5 years, became fascinated by her eggs Benedict when Margaret stopped to say hello. Susan Morrison claimed an urgent phone call. Rather than continue their conversation, by the time Margaret reached her usual table, she understood that the conspiracy had become public knowledge. Margaret, dear. Janet Crawford's voice carried false sweetness. We missed you at the planning committee meeting yesterday. What meeting? I wasn't informed. Oh, didn't you get the message? We had to make some organizational changes. You understand? Margaret was beginning to recognize the pattern. Phone calls not returned, invitations rescinded, social doors closing with whispered officiants. Meanwhile, I conducted my own campaign with considerably more success. 35 years of honest dealing had earned me credibility that no legal maneuvering could destroy. My lunch with Tom Bradley at the bank proved strategically productive. I shared concerns about family difficulties with just enough detail to establish facts. Without appearing vindictive, Margaret and her son-in-law apparently developed concerning plans. Regarding our assets, I mentioned over coffee. I've had to implement protective measures. Tom's response was exactly what I'd hoped for. Professional understanding mixed with personal sympathy for a friend dealing with family betrayal. The Chamber of Commerce board meeting that evening proved equally valuable. When Jim Morrison asked about Margaret's absence from the recent fundraising dinner, I explained with genuine sadness about marriage difficulties that have come to light. Sometimes you discover people aren't who you thought they were, I said, allowing disappointment to show. 2 years of marriage, and it turns out she was planning well. I'm grateful I found out when I did. By Sunday evening, Margaret's social isolation was complete. The country club membership committee scheduled a routine review of her status. The charity board accepted her resignation from positions she never submitted, and professional collapse accelerated alongside Margaret's. Social exile. 3 major clients terminated relationships, citing concerns about judgment and ethical standards. The Miller Industries account, worth $200,000 annually, sent a formal letter expressing loss of confidence in counsel's professional discretion. Margaret's frantic Sunday night call to Dan carried desperation I could hear through their apartments. Thin walls, everyone knows. Dan, everyone. I can't show my face anywhere in this town. We'll file emergency motions Monday morning. Force Alan into defensive position. Before what? Before you lose your law license. Before I move back to my sister's house in Minnesota. Their mutual recrimination session lasted until midnight. The conspirators discovered that shared guilt wasn't the same as shared solutions. Tomorrow would bring their last desperate gambit. I was ready. Monday morning found Margaret in Linda Hawthorne's downtown office, a divorce attorney whose reputation for scorched earth tactics had earned her both notoriety and high fees. The glass conference room overlooked the courthouse where Margaret hoped to destroy me. But the lawyer's expression suggested limited optimism. Mrs. Cole, I've reviewed your materials. Linda's voice carried professional skepticism. Your husband's financial protective measures appear legally sound. Joint account holders have the right to restrict access during marital discord. But it's financial abuse. Margaret's desperation leaked through her victim persona. He's controlling every aspect of my access to the money we earned together. Money he earned, according to tax records spanning 25 years. Linda consulted her notes. Your income contributions appear minimal. You haven't been employed outside the home since 1989. Margaret's face flushed. Being a homemaker had represented luxury and security. Now it looked like evidence of dependency. What about emotional abuse, intimidation tactics? What specific incidents can you document? The question hung in the air. Margaret had spent sleepless nights trying to construct believable abuse patterns. From 25 years of Alan's genuine consideration and generosity, he's controlling about money. Always has been. Can you provide examples of threats, physical, intimidation, isolation from family or friends? Well, no, but Mrs. Cole, domestic abuse cases require evidence. Has your husband ever threatened you physically, prevented you from leaving the house, or monitored your communications? Each question struck holes in Margaret's fabricated narrative. Alan had never raised his voice in anger, never restricted her activities, never questioned her friendships 10 blocks away. Dan discovered that bar association investigations moved with bureaucratic efficiency. When they wanted answers, Mr. Thompson, we've received additional complaints regarding your handling of client trust accounts, specifically allegations that you've been using client funds for personal expenses. Pending case resolution. Dan's hand tightened on the phone. Those allegations are unfounded. I've always maintained proper accounting. We have documentation from Martinez Electrical showing invoices submitted 8 months ago with promises of payment pending client approval. Yet your client settled 6 months ago. Where are those funds currently? The answer was his checking account, where contractor payments had been diverted to cover office rent and student loans. What had seemed like resourceful cash flow management now appeared as embezzlement. There may have been administrative delays. Mr. Thompson, we're scheduling a formal hearing for Thursday morning. You'll need complete financial records for all client accounts dating back 18 months. By Wednesday evening, Margaret and Dan had reached the desperation that breeds dangerous decisions. Their emergency strategy session in Dan's nearly empty office felt like generals planning a final assault with no ammunition. "We have to file domestic violence claims," Margaret announced with false confidence. "It's the only way to force him into a defensive position." Margaret, false domestic violence allegations are felony charges if we're caught, given the evidence he probably has. "What evidence?" "I've never said anything in front of cameras or witnesses that would contradict." She stopped, remembering the recording that started this cascade. The recording proves we were planning a financial strategy, not documenting his abuse. So we reframe it. Your legal expertise, my victim testimony. Make the narrative about long-term emotional manipulation and financial control. Dan stared at her across the conference table. 6 months ago, she'd been a bored housewife, seeking excitement. Now she was proposing perjury in federal court if this fails. "We're both facing criminal charges. If we don't try, I'm facing poverty and you're facing disbarment anyway." Margaret's voice carried the calculation of someone who lost everything, except the ability to take others down. "At least this way we go down fighting." Thursday mornings, restraining order hearing would determine whether their Hail Mary succeeded, or whether they'd simply provided Alan with more conspiracy evidence. Neither realized their opponent had spent the entire week documenting every phone call, every desperate meeting, every lie they told the lawyers, and friend Solon Cole wasn't just defending himself anymore. He was building a prosecution. Cassidy Davenport County Courthouse felt different on May 1st, as if 35 years of honest reputation had crystallized into something tangible I could carry into battle. Judge Patricia Hendricks presided over domestic relations court with no-nonsense efficiency. Having seen every form of family deception imaginable, Eggert sat at the plaintiff's table, with Linda Hawthorne, wearing the carefully chosen outfit of a battered wife, conservative dress, minimal makeup, nervous demeanor that might have been genuine given the stakes. "Mrs. Cole," Judge Hendricks began, reviewing the emergency restraining order petition, "you allege your husband has engaged in financial abuse and intimidation. Can you describe specific incidents that led you to fear for your safety?" Margaret's voice trembled with practiced vulnerability. "Your Honor, for months my husband has been restricting my access to our accounts, monitoring my spending, making threats about what would happen if I tried to leave." "What kind of threats?" "Mrs. Cole, financial threats, that I'd be left with nothing, that he'd use his business connections to destroy my reputation." Margaret paused for effect. "Last week, he completely cut off my access to money, even for basic necessities. I watched my wife of 25 years perjure herself with increasing confidence, each lie built upon the previous one, creating fictional abuse from a man who'd spent decades providing every comfort." She demoned Judge Hendricks turned to my attorney, James Morrison. "Does the defendant wish to respond?" James stood with calm authority, earned through 30 years practicing law without suborning perjury. "Your Honor, we have evidence that Mrs. Cole's claims are not only false, but part of a deliberate conspiracy to defraud the defendant of marital assets. That's a serious allegation, Counselor. We have an audio recording of Mrs. Cole and her co-conspirator, Daniel Thompson, planning this exact scenario 6 weeks ago." Margaret's face went white. Linda Hawthorne whispered frantically in her client's ear, but damage control was impossible. "When your entire case was built on lies, I like to present Exhibit A," James continued, connecting his phone to the courtroom's audio system. Margaret's voice filled the chamber. "When the old fool finally signs the papers, we'll have everything we planned for." For 43 minutes, Judge Hendricks listened to the complete conspiracy unfold. Margaret's mockery of our marriage, Dan's legal strategies for asset seizure, and their calculated plan to manipulate Brianna's psychology credentials. "The man believes I love him," Margaret's recorded voice declared with casual cruelty. "You watched My wife's fabricated victim narrative crumbled in real time. Her coached testimony about fearing for her safety became absurd when contrasted with her recorded laughter about manipulating the old foliage. Hendricks stopped the recording. Mrs. Cole, do you have any response to this evidence? Margaret's mouth opened and closed silently. Linda Hawthorne's face had gone pale as she realized her client had used her to file fraudulent court documents. Your Honor, Linda said carefully, I request permission to withdraw from this case. I was not informed of these circumstances when I agreed to representation. Motion granted. Judge Hendricks fixed Margaret with the stare she reserved for perjurers. Mrs. Cole, I'm dismissing your restraining order petition with prejudice. Furthermore, I'm referring this matter to the District Attorney's Office for investigation of possible perjury charges. The gavel fell with finality that echoed through the courtroom 2 weeks later. The divorce settlement reflected Margaret's spectacular miscalculation. Her documented deception eliminated any claim to spousal support, and the prenuptial agreement she'd forgotten signed eagerly in 1991 limited her to minimal asset division. The settlement left her with only what she had entered the marriage with: a modest personal savings account and a tarnished reputation. Den's law license suspension became a permanent revocation when the Bar Association discovered $127,000 in missing client funds. His carefully curated image as a rising legal star disintegrated under the weight of embezzlement charges. Last I heard, he moved to Nebraska, working as a paralegal for a firm willing to overlook his disgrace for a fraction of his former salary. Brianna filed for divorce the day after the hearing, citing irreconcilable differences. Her announcement was clinical and detached, delivered with the same precision she applied to therapy sessions, but her resolve was unshakable. She relocated her practice, refocused her specialty, and built a new foundation on transparency and ethical boundary. 6 months later, Margaret works retail at the same mall where she once spent my money on luxury items. The irony isn't lost on either of us. She rings up customers with the same practiced smile she once wore at charity galas. The whispers follow her, polite but unmistakable. Cold construction, however, rebuilt stronger than before. The community's support during my family's public collapse translated into new contracts and deeper business relationships. My lunch meetings were no longer about damage control, but about future. Venturist house feels different now, quieter, but honest. No more performed conversations or calculated affection. Just the sound of rain on windows I built with my own hands in a home that's finally mine again. Margaret had been right about one thing. I had believed she loved me, but now I know the difference between love and performance, and that knowledge, costly as it was, bought me peace. If you like this story, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share your impressions in the comments. To listen to the next story, click on the box on the left. Thank you for watching.